What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the show. This week we have a Q&A episode, so thank you to everybody who asked a question. We've been getting into a nice rhythm of every other week doing a Q&A, and the other weeks doing either a solo episode or a guest episode. So it's been just good so far this year. I've really enjoyed that sort of cadence, just alternating between them, and so we're going to keep that up and see how it goes. I think I have Spencer Nadolski coming on the podcast and a couple other guests I'm pretty excited about over the next couple of months. And we'll do some solo episodes in there and some Q&As, and so nice mixed bag. Let's jump into today's episode. I don't look at these questions beforehand. These are ones that you guys put in Instagram through that anonymous Q&A thing. You guys are always really, really great with questions. There's always a ton of them. If you don't hear your question answered here, chances are I'm answering it in my stories, but I pick, 10 or so to go through here. So let's get into it. First question. Remember you mentioning your genetic risk for cardiovascular disease, etc. How come you tested the ApoE alleles? Were you just curious and wondering if you had a reason? I have somehow high cholesterol despite eating less than 25 grams of saturated fat per day and thought to do the test too, even though nobody in my fam has tested so far. So I'll say so what this person's saying is I mentioned in my stories the other day that I have 2 copies of the ApoE4 allele, which are genes that we, all have in some way, shape, or form. You either have, 2 copies of either ApoE 2, 3, or 4, and the worst scenario is having 2 copies of ApoE4. And so if you have 2 copies of ApoE4, you are called ApoE4 homozygous, meaning you have just the same 2 of them. And it makes you roughly 12 times more likely to get Alzheimer's, more likely to develop cardiovascular disease, on average, more likely to have higher ApoB and LDL cholesterol levels. It affects about 1% of the population. And I am that, and I've known that for about a decade. And when I first learned about it, I didn't seek that out. The question asker is saying, how did you come about deciding to get that test? I didn't. I just did like a DNA fit. It was like some DNA testing with like a fitness umbrella. So it would like go through your genome, and it would, the truth is some of this isn't exactly evidence-based. Let's just start by saying that. But one of the most important, actually the only thing I can even remember from doing this was that I am a homozygous ApoE4. And when I learned that, it made perfect sense. Alzheimer's runs rampant in my family, and that made a whole lot of sense. My dad and historically family have had higher than average cholesterol levels. Again, despite doing the things you'd want to be doing, just like this person is asking, eating less than 25 grams saturated fat per day. I don't think it's a bad idea to get tested. I don't think it really changes the path of treatment, let's say, or the changes that you'd want to make to your life. It's not like finding out I was ApoE4 changed what I wanted to do. I'm glad I know. I don't want to poo-poo the idea of knowing. If I'm you and I'm interested, I would go get tested. I think that's, it's an empowering thing to know. It's certainly something I think about when it comes to a lot of the things, just a lot of normal health things. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds about like little niche things that somebody in this situation could do, but it has mostly just reinforced, hey man, like you have this gene, makes you more likely to develop these 2 things that aren't super fun late in life. And so better be as healthy as possible, dude. And so, yeah, that's certainly the take home for me. And if you're interested in that, I think some of these like DNA companies, I'm sure anything where you're getting your DNA tested, this would be something that they're looking at heavily, whether it's a fitness related one or not. So cool. Next question. I need a break from tracking, but I still have 7 to 12 pounds I want to lose. Is there any downside to using intermittent fasting as a deep calorie deficit for a time period? It seems to be the only way I can lose weight, but I know I am not hitting protein for the day. So, okay, you don't want to track for a bit. You still have weight you want to lose. Can you lean on intermittent fasting as a way to get you into a deficit without tracking? Yes, you absolutely can do that. Without a doubt. No big deal. What I wouldn't do is train first thing in the morning right out of bed and then intermittent fast till 2:00. If you're somebody who trains first thing in the morning or during your fasting window, I would either have a little bit of food right before or during or afterwards, prioritizing protein. So even if you're not, intermittent fasting, you don't need to like eat nothing. The point of intermittent fasting is you're backlogging calories. You're just not eating during a time where you might also not be super hungry. the one implication is you just wouldn't want to weight train and then not have any protein. Let's say you train at 5 a.m. Don't also not have protein till like 2 p.m. Right? You've been fasting overnight. Don't do a huge long fast after you train if you're interested in maintaining as much lean body mass as possible. So, and I swear I'm not trying to be rude. I'm trying to be helpful with this last part, but I don't believe you. You're like, I'm not hitting protein for the day. I don't believe you. Like, you can still hit protein in an 8-hour feeding window. You can still hit protein in 2 meals, right? Like, I'm not saying it's super fun to have like 80 grams of protein, 70 grams of protein, 60 grams of protein in a single meal. I'm not saying that that's your preferred way to eat, but you can do it. Like, you've done way harder shit in your life than plan out how to get 60 grams of protein in a meal, for example, right? If you had 50 grams at breakfast and then 40 grams in a shake as a snack and then 60 grams at dinner, right? You're at 160 grams of protein. There's just no, like, you can do that. There's nothing actually holding you back from saying, okay, I'm having eggs and egg whites as my breakfast. I'm having, steak, tofu, salmon, whatever as my dinner protein. And I'm just going to do the math to make sure that the portion is sufficient. There's just no, I get it. It's less meals. You have to have more protein per meal. That's not always super fun. But 2 meals and a protein shake, you can absolutely get to your protein for the day, unless you're assuming that your protein needs to be like 2 grams per pound. Then, okay, yeah, that's super hard. But to get to like 0.7 grams per pound, you can absolutely do it. Next question. Busy gym means I have to use a different leg curl or leg extension machines week to week, and the weights just aren't consistent. Any ideas of how to navigate this so I can still feel progression? Well, let's say you have 2 of each, right? You have a leg different, like a hammer strength leg curl and a different one that's like selectorized, whatever. Just mark that down in your program, right? It's not like you're using 10 different machines, I'm guessing. And so, yes, the different machines by different brands, the same machine by different brands is going to still have dramatically different weights. So you might be using a seated hamstring curl from whatever, Life Fitness, and you use 100 pounds. And you go over and there's that hoist ham curl and you use 160 pounds. It be like that sometimes. So don't try to equate perfectly the weights that you use between machines, but make a note and say week 1 was the hoist machine. Week 2 was the hammer strength machine. And then, if you're alternating back or you're sporadically bouncing between them, you'll at least have a reference point for where you've been on that machine prior. So even if it was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when you were on this machine, at least you know that you did 100 pounds for 8, and you can say, cool, I'm going to shoot for a little bit more than that. But more than anything, when you have to, so I'm going to use an example of people who travel a lot. So if you travel a lot, this is like a macrocosm of this question, which is like you're always on different machines in different gyms, right? There's so many different things you're dealing with. You're never training in the same situation. So if you're somebody who trains and you travel a lot, you really need to lean on the pursuit of a stimulus. The pursuit of progression is going to be almost impossible because you're not equating apples to apples. You can't like do 10 reps of 100 pounds this week in, California on the Life Fitness gym. And then when you're flying across country over to New York, you're in your hotel gym with like a completely different machine. Like you can't think, I'm going to just add a rep. It's just not the same. So instead of the pursuit of progression, you want the pursuit of a stimulus. So this is when I would really, really emphasize the focus on making your sets really hard, right? More than anything, it is not progression that grows muscle. It is hard training. Hard sets, hard training over time that grows muscle. It is the pursuit of progression that helps you consistently train hard. That's the point of trying to progress. The point of trying to progress is to keep the pedal down. It's to keep you pushing yourself as you get stronger. But it's a tool to help you train hard. And so you might not have that tool because you're traveling, you're using different machines. But what you do have is the knowledge that what matters is doing a lot of hard sets. So I would love for you to find a bit of calm in the idea of just sitting down in the machine and making your quads hurt. Don't get up until your quads freaking hurt. Don't get up till your hamstrings freaking hurt. Go close to failure. That's what matters. You miss out on the diagnostic side of being able to meticulously track your progression. But you won't lose out on gains that much, if at all, if you really focus on bringing it when you sit down in that machine and working hard close to failure. Next question. Been super consistent with nutrition, 1,400 to 1,600 calories a day and 3 to 4 times a week training with a 10 to 30 minute walk most days. That's awesome. Not seeing any changes after about 8 weeks. Maintenance should be around 1900. I'm 5'4", 138 pounds, roughly 25% body fat. Would like to get to 2000 to 22% body fat. What needs tweaked? Or what needs to be tweaked? I'm frustrated. So I appreciate you giving me all of the data. You are super thorough here. I appreciate it. But what's important for me is to communicate to you that while that data is very important to me, it doesn't change the aggregate of everything you're telling me. Like, even though you're giving me all this data, it doesn't change that everything together. First of all, I'll address the 6 weeks thing in a second. But if you're saying, hey, I've been super consistent with nutrition, eating an amount of calories that I predict to be a deficit, and I'm not losing any weight over 6 weeks, then I would say, hey, I appreciate all the data, but no matter what has come out of your mouth or whatever you've written, it's not a deficit. Now, it's difficult to speak in absolutes. It might be a small deficit. Maybe it's, maybe you have lost weight. You haven't mentioned if you've lost any weight. You said you haven't even mentioned if you've lost weight. My assumption is you haven't, because you seem to be frustrated, and that seems, likely that that's what you'd be frustrated over. But if you haven't lost weight in 6 weeks, you're not in a calorie deficit. And so that I don't want that to be an attacking sentence, but it must be the place that we get to. It must be the common ground that we get to first, so that we can start asking questions as to, okay, and what do we do about it now? How is that possible? What do we do about it now? What I would say is 6 weeks, when you say I'm not seeing changes, if you mean I'm not seeing changes like in my physique, I will just kindly say no shit. 6 weeks is just not long enough to see anything meaningful happening to your physique. That's kind of what the scale is for, because it can actually detect really small changes that can affirm to you that you are doing, in fact, what you'd like to be doing, which is losing weight in this context, is my guess. But if you have seen no weight change in 6 weeks, you're not in a deficit. Or you are almost certainly not in a deficit. The circumstance where you might be in a deficit but not losing weight is if you just started resistance training. Let's say you have never resistance trained before, and you started this deficit and started resistance training at the same time. You could be simultaneously building muscle and incurring a high level of inflammation from training, which, by the way, that's good stuff. Inflammation in terms of training is good, or it's helpful in the right amount, which is going to lead to some water retention. So if I took a sedentary person who gets into a deficit and starts lifting weights, and they're not down any weight in 6 weeks, I bet you that they have lost fat and gained muscle even in just a 6 week period. But, if you're not sedentary, I'd still probably expect the rate of weight loss to outpace those other things and for you to actually see some movement on the scale. So what needs to be tweaked without, again, this being a back and forth conversation where this would be a lot more helpful? Like, you need to lower calories. If you haven't lost weight in 6 weeks, you're not in a deficit. You can be interested as to how that's possible. A lot of people will be like, well, how is that possible? Or why do I have to eat so little? And totally fine to expend a little bit of energy on those questions, but they don't change any of the truth, which is that you're not in a deficit if you haven't lost weight in 6 weeks. Again, you're almost certainly not in a deficit if you haven't lost weight in 6 weeks. So I love your routine, by the way. I think I have to leave with, dude, you're training, 3 or 4 times a week. You're getting in some walks. It sounds like you're probably eating, fairly nutritious with enough protein. That's awesome. You're doing amazing for your health. And if you put that on repeat, I bet you recomp in a way that you feel really good about. Will you lose, a significant amount of weight? No, probably not if you haven't at all in 6 weeks. But I just want to say that is an awesome routine, and you will move towards greater health maintenance, gaining strength. I mean, this is an awesome routine. I'm super happy. Even if you're at maintenance calories, you'll enjoy the sort of physique change that happens. You just have to probably expand your timeline to more like 6 months, not 6 weeks. Okay, next question. Are kettlebell leg extensions good/safe? I have a few kettlebells sitting around trying to find a use for them. Any non-kettlebell exercises you recommend? Thanks. I'll start by saying I'm not the kettlebell wizard. Not even remotely close. Took 1 2-day kettlebell seminar maybe 10 years ago. Have not touched a kettlebell since. Kettlebell leg extensions, I'm assuming you mean putting your foot through the ring and then doing leg extensions at the edge of a bench. Now, they are both good and safe to do. They have one huge downside, though, is that there's no tension when the knee is bent and the shin is perpendicular to the ground. And there is all the tension when your knee is fully extended, kind of straight, and your quads are contracted. So what that means is there's no tension for the quads in a stretch position. There's only tension for the quads in a fully shortened position. And that's, I don't poo-poo short position work. I'm cool with working the short position. I think that there are reasons to have that in your training. The idea that everything needs to be lengthened to the max, I think, is an overshot by the industry right now. But it's a significant downside to have no tension in a bent or stretched position here. So could you do them? Yeah, I think you'd find it hard to make it hard. I think a machine is a humongous upgrade here, but I think if I had them, I might play around with it and see what the stimulus is like. I have not done them personally, but I can imagine what that's like. Any non-kettlebell swing exercises you'd recommend? I'd have to ask you for what goal. If you said muscle growth or strength, I'd say that there are ones you could do, but they'd be just things you do with dumbbells that you are now doing with kettlebells, right? So like a lunge or a Bulgarian split squat, deadlift, a goblet good morning, goblet squat, something like that, whatever. But those aren't kettlebell specific, right? So a kettlebell swing is absolutely a kettlebell specific exercise. So I'd have to know your goals. Truthfully, I think kettlebells are humongously overrated and cumbersome and almost can't find a reason to use them ever, to be honest. But I'm also not Mr. Kettlebell either. I'm sure there are people who love kettlebells who would say otherwise. I'd be happy to propose, the alternative side of those discussions, of course. But for strength and hypertrophy, you're almost certainly going to have better options for like power and, maybe some, for power stuff, for like cleans and kettlebell swings. Maybe. I still think you have better options if you want to, pursue power development also. I don't mean to be overly negative about kettlebells. I just think that they're more of like a niche thing that isn't really the best for any goal, in my opinion, but certainly can be a part of an overall program for health. Next question, tips on training shoulders without engaging traps. Yeah, so take a scalpel and cut directly into your upper trap and then slide it down your neck to the shoulder joint, and then grab your traps, your upper traps, which I'm assuming are the ones you're curious about, and then throw them off your body because they will absolutely be working whenever you do things like lateral raises, overhead presses, even like whatever, rear delt flies, front delt raises, whatever. Like your traps, first of all, your trap is a humongous muscle. If for a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't want to engage my traps, Google the anatomy of the trap. The trap is a humongous muscle with at least 3 divisions, with fibers that run more vertically in the upper traps, more horizontally in the mid traps, again, more vertically on the low traps. So I'm assuming people mean their upper traps. A lot of people, tend to not want to grow them. I don't mean to overgeneralize, but most women are a little bit nervous about these traps getting bigger. Here's my take. I don't mean to poo-poo the question. I'm sorry if I started off with a bit of a sarcasm there, but the traps are going to work. It's possible that many people who try to disengage their traps with some sort of a strategy also are getting way worse. They're making the exercise worse for whatever goal it was, If you don't want to overly engage your traps, let me back up. There's a difference between overly engaging your traps and training your traps to the degree in which they will grow a ton. So if you're worried about them growing a ton, I would not train them directly with a lot of shrugging. I wouldn't do a ton of heavy deadlifting and heavy overhead pressing. But when I say a ton of heavy I mean, you can still do some of both of those, and I think you're going to be fine. I guess I struggle. I can't really get on this level because I think the fear is a little unwarranted and kind of baked in the idea that because I feel this thing working, it's going to grow into a balloon, right? It's kind of like that thing of like, I don't want to lift because I don't want to get bulky. It's like, I don't want these things to work at all because I think they're going to get humongous. And I just don't think that happens. Some tips while we're here would be, to try and avoid an upward shrugging motion on your lateral raises, think about pressing your hand out to the wall behind, to your sides. So if imagine you're standing with 2 dumbbells in your hand, you're going to do a dumbbell lateral raise. And this goes for any lateral raise, by the way. instead of thinking about pulling the dumbbells up, which most likely brings in some sort of a shrugging motion, think about pushing the dumbbells away from you towards the walls to your sides. That is one way to at least initiate that initial lift with what the mid delts actually do better, right? Instead of shrugging up, moving the arm out. Other things would maybe, if you're also not interested in, growing your middle traps, don't do a lot of exercises that encourage a lot of scapular retraction, where you're doing a lot of rowing motions with your arms out, where you're pinching the shoulder blades. But I don't love giving these recommendations because I just don't think that there's a scenario where you have traps that grow to a degree where you're like, man, these things have grown a ton, and now I look like Brock Lesnar. It's like, that's not, if you're doing exercises appropriately, the traps are, and you're not training the traps directly, they're probably not getting a big growth stimulus, right? Like if you do lateral raises, no matter how you do them, your middle delts will be the primary mover of that movement. So any stimulus your traps get, it's kind of like we'll call it a secondary stimulus. It's not a robust stimulus where those muscle fibers the high threshold motor units are being recruited maximally and taxed, a ton of mechanical tension. I just don't think that's going to happen to a degree in which you feel like you've blown up into someone with no neck. I also think if you don't want to grow a certain muscle, then I would make sure you're not eating in a, big calorie surplus. Yeah. Sorry if I came down hard on that one. I guess I get a little triggered at about whatever sorts of things that fall into the bucket of societal expectations of what women should look like or any people should look like that make them not want to do certain types of exercise, right? Any sort of like societal expectations of what we should look like that deter a person from exercising in a given way that might actually be helpful for them. That triggers me a little bit. That's all. Cool. Next question. Do you have clients or group members come to you with very high cardio and steps? Do you work with them to bring it down, or are you of the opinion that all movement is good, so let it be? I'm a foodie, have a very active job, and strength train 4 times a week. Seems to balance out well. I'm wary if activity dropped, I might balloon. So I think there's something baked into this question, which is, are there things that are inherently bad for people, right? Like, is there an amount of focusing on your nutrition and getting enough movement? Is there an amount of that is inherently bad? So I've had clients who have gotten over 25,000 steps per day. And instead of a knee jerk where you mentioned, do you work with them to bring it down? I don't automatically do that, but what I will absolutely do is explore with them why they're doing so many steps, how they are getting those steps. Is getting this many steps part of their happiest life? Right? Like, I'm only going to help you lower your steps if you are miserable getting that many steps and you are putting yourself through that out of fear of something happening, right? Like, you are saying, I'm wary if activity dropped, I might balloon. So you and I would have a conversation about, what your happiest life looks like. Does it look like getting this many steps per day? Or are you doing that out of a daily fear that if you don't get that many steps, you might balloon, as you put it? That I was going to say screams to me, but scream is like an overstatement. That would point out to me that we should probably be a bit curious as to, how to maybe paint a different picture of what your happiest life looks like with an amount of activity that actually feels good and doesn't feel burdensome, that you're not doing out of fear. So, yeah, I mean, group members, we tend to not communicate the amount of steps we're doing. It's just not something that I'm prompting anybody to share. Of course, people can share and people do share things, but we're not necessarily like, hey, I get this many steps per day. So that's something I don't come into contact with as much. But I've had clients get over 25,000 steps per day. And if you think that triggers me to at least poke around, it absolutely does. If you come to me and you start filling out your sheet and you're getting 28,000 steps per day, you best believe I'm going to poke around to see how happy you are with that lifestyle. But so you said, are you of the opinion that all movement is good, so just let it be? I'm of the opinion that an amount of movement that supports health, that you feel good doing, that you're doing in a good headspace, that you're not doing out of fear for, something that you don't need to be afraid of. Yeah, I think that's where I'd start to poke around. So it's possible. Do I have clients that answer that question in the way that we do pursue bringing their steps down? Absolutely. Do I ever poke around and have people say, yeah, I'm doing this and I'm not happy about it, but I get on the treadmill because I'm deathly afraid of gaining any weight, and I get on there for hours a day? And do we come to the conclusion that their happiest life involves a little less activity? We do. And I've done that many, many times. And I've seen most of the time that it works out amazingly well, that there's less to be afraid of than they thought. I've seen some people do it and gain a tiny bit of weight, and then we decide if we want to modify calorie intake. But I will say the highest % outcome is that you change your steps down to an amount that feels sustainable, maybe gradually, maybe all at once, and not that much changes. When we're talking about really high step numbers, there's some sort of a diminishing return with more activity, right? So if you go from they say that on average 10,000 steps burns about 5,000 calories. Let's go with that metric because that will differ wildly from person to person, but it's easy math. From 10,000, so that means 5,000 steps get you 250 calories. Again, all of these numbers are mostly made up. That first one of 10,000 steps or 500 calories, that's mostly accurate, but everything from here on is me just painting a picture, a heuristic, if I may. From 10,000 to 15,000, it's not another 250 calories. Let's say it's 200 calories. And then from 15 to 2,000, it's maybe 150 calories. And then from 20 to 25,000, maybe it's 100 calories. Because you're getting more efficient at that thing. And there is some research that looks at energy compensation within a day. They look at even like hunter-gatherer populations that move like 50,000 steps per day, and they look at their calorie intake. And you would think, okay, 50,000, I think it's the Hadza, 50,000 steps per day or something crazy because they're out, foraging and hunting and moving. They must be eating thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of calories, and they're just not. Their calorie intake isn't what you'd expect. And there's a lot going on there. I don't want to just say it's this sort of energy compensation is all that's happening, but to answer this roundabout thing, this does happen to me with clients. Sometimes we bring them down because that's going to make their life happier. And in those scenarios, it almost always works out exactly how it says on the box, meaning we get them to do less activity with or without nutritional adjustments, and life goes on much happier without the fear of needing to do a bajillion steps. How far are you from marathon race day? Do you plan to implement a similar run-walk strategy as you did for the half, or are you at such a better fitness level you'd like to run the entire time? I'm super far out from marathon race day. I am super far. I'm on what's today? Monday, February 24th. I'm like 8 days into marathon training, and I call it marathon training just because that's the next thing that's on my list to do, not because I'm like on a mega hyper specific marathon training program. I'm just calling it that. I'm probably not running a marathon for till October. So what do we have? Let's pretend it's March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. So 8 months. So very far away. Very, very far away. I'm probably going to run a half marathon during my prep for this over the summer at some point. And just to recap, this person, nice of you to have been following me along for that long. But when I ran my first half marathon a year and a half ago, 18 months ago or so, I wasn't fit enough to run it at a pace that was going to be comfortable for me. What I mean by that is if you've ever gone out for a run and you run at like a 12-minute mile, 11 or 12-minute mile, that technique is very inefficient. It's like a shuffle. You're just shuffling. I'm not poo-pooing this, by the way. I started from the bottom. So when I talk about like a slow running or a person who's not super fit, like that's because that was me and still in some ways is me. So when I say this, just know I know from experience. I'm not someone who came out of the womb good at running. I suck at this. I sucked at running. I think I suck a little less now, but I sucked when I started. And so if I wanted to run the half marathon without walking, so if I wanted to do a continuous running, I would have had to run it, around a 10:30 to 11 minute mile pace, maybe like a 10:45, 11. And that technique is energy inefficient. It's just not an efficient technique from an energy perspective, meaning like the cost of traveling a certain distance because of the technique is higher relatively than if you were to run faster. So if you get on the treadmill and you put it on 5 miles an hour, I challenge you to do this. 5 miles an hour is a 12-minute mile pace. You will find that that's a kind of awkward technique. And before you even think about your own fitness level, just think about the technique. It's kind of awkward and it's inefficient. So you might say, well, I'm not very fit. And so if I want to run this thing the entire time, I have to run at that pace. And that was me. So if I wanted to run the marathon at a continuous pace, or half marathon, I would have had to run it with an inefficient technique. And by the way, of course you can do that. There's no one way to do this. I much preferred running at around a 9:30. At a 9:30, my pace was a little bit more efficient and I enjoyed running at that pace more, but I could not run the whole race at a 9:30. So I developed with my coach a strategy where I would run for 6.5 minutes and then I would walk for 1 to 2 minutes and then 6.5 minutes of running. Both walking and running are more efficient in terms of energy cost per distance covered than shuffling. So I was walking, which is slower, but still conserves energy. It's still pretty efficient for the amount of distance that you're traveling. And then I was running a bit more, jog running, at a technique that felt good for me. And that strategy was awesome. It meant I spent the half marathon, I spent the whole race moving efficiently. If I tried to do it in a continuous run, I would have run it at like an 11-minute mile, which is, again, by the way, that you can totally do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's an inefficient technique. It's not a comfortable pace for me. I don't like running at that pace. And so I opted for this run walk strategy. To answer your question, I am now fit enough where I could run the whole thing. First of all, definitely a half marathon. I did basically a half marathon the other day at like an 8:45. At a 9:14, not an 8:45. I did the back half at like an 8:45. I'm definitely a lot fitter. I've been running 3 times a week for the last 18 months. And I will tell you, I'll do a podcast actually about looking back at some of my earlier workouts. Maybe that would be fun because I really sucked. I really sucked in the beginning. Like running for 1 minute, I was gassed, So I'm fit enough where I will run the whole thing. My goal will probably be to break 4 hours. That's roughly a 9-minute mile for the whole thing. Which is crazy to think that a year and a half ago, I couldn't run a half marathon at sub 10, let's say, I couldn't run a half marathon at sub 10:30. And I think I'll be able to run a marathon. If I run the whole marathon at a 9-minute mile pace, I'll be speechless at how impressed and proud of myself I will be. But mathematically, if we're just keeping it a buck, mathematically, according to the algorithm, I can do that almost now. The algorithm, we have a pretty good idea of what my lactate threshold is. Don't worry about these terminologies here. But most marathons are run at roughly 88%, or you can run a marathon at roughly 88% of your threshold. And that kind of works out to, something like a 9-ish minute mile, a bit. Let me just, I'm sitting at my computer. Let me just double check that. 88% of my threshold is a 9:02. So the algorithm thinks I can run a marathon at around a 9:02. And best case, by the way, like it thinks that if I do a good job, that's roughly where I think I could finish. So I think with another, 6 to 8 months of working on it, I think I'll be able to do it, but I'm certainly not like counting my chickens. I'd be pretty stoked. But I scrolled back the other day, just going back to some of my early workouts, and I think that would be a fun podcast just because, I don't know, running progression is more vague. It's not like lifting where you put 2 pounds on the bar or you get one more rep. It's just not, it's a little bit more vague where like a couple months go by and then you have like one workout where you're like, yeah, I feel a little fitter, or, that felt easier than I thought. It's like happens kind of out of the blue. And then that'll happen a couple of times over like a 6-month period, 8-month period. And then you wake up and you're like, holy crap, I'm much more fit. But it doesn't happen overnight and it's a little bit more vague. So I'd love to share kind of just the journey of sucking less a little bit over time. Cool. Let's do 10 more minutes. Let's see how many more we can get in. How best to set up on leg sled for adductors. So a leg sled, you can imagine, is just a leg press in reverse, right? A leg press is typically a machine that runs on a 45-degree angle with a foot plate and a backrest. And with a leg press, you are pushing the sled away from you. With a leg sled, you are in a seat that moves, and you're pushing away from a fixed foot plate. So this question goes both for leg sled and adductors. It's pretty easy. The wider you go, the more adductors. So if you close your eyes and you imagine a rectangle, and that rectangle is the foot plate of any leg press or the leg sled. The higher your feet go on that leg press, the less quads, the more glutes. The lower you go on that foot plate, the more quads, the less glutes. The wider you go, the more adductors. So if you wanted to get quads and adductors, you'd use a low and wide stance. If you wanted glutes and adductors, you'd use a wide, high stance. If you wanted mostly glutes and not much or the least of everything else, you'd use a high foot position with feet close together. If you want quads and not a lot of adductors, you'd use a low foot position and feet close together. So to answer your question, I like personally, if my goal is adductors, what I will do is I'll pick a shoulder width or a little bit wider stance. I'll point my toes or externally rotate my feet a little bit outwards. And then I will choose a height, so how high my feet are on the platform, where I feel like I get the most depth. And so that's usually kind of middle height, wide, not crazy wide, shoulder width and maybe a tiny bit more, and feet externally rotated maybe 20, 30 degrees, just to let my knees kind of travel out as I come down. And I will optimize an adductor leg press for depth. An adductor leg press is where you will, in all likelihood, be able to achieve the most depth. So the types of changes you'd make to your stance to solve for depth, chances are that also moves you into a really comfortable adductor position. How do you plan your running routes? I don't really run very far most of the time. My runs are like 4 or 5 miles. Sorry, I don't mean to be, that's so annoying. I don't want to do that. Like, I'm proud of myself. I don't like being self-deprecating, and there are people out there that are like, I don't even run that far, and Jordan's shitting on himself for, no, I'm just saying I'm not running like 10 miles where I need to like plan this big elaborate route. I'm usually running, 4 to 5 miles per workout. And I got to tell you, I do that mostly in my little community. We live in a townhome community. I mostly run there because it's flat and because there's not a lot of through traffic. So I can run on the gravel or on the blacktop, which is a little softer. I can run on the street safely. This past weekend, I did 12 miles. And I thought, you know what? I actually am going to blow my brains out if I run 12 miles around this little community here. So I did go outside of the community, planned a little bit of a route, but there are some, like on either side of when we leave the community, there's like a big hill. And so I was like, it's kind of annoying. There's like this big freaking hill in the middle of a long run, but I had to get out. And so I planned a little route. I stopped by a school and I did 2 miles on the track and then left the track, got back on the road. So what I think would be fun is if you were to, like, I know people love Strava, and with Strava you can like find places to go run. You can go. People have found like very pretty routes, or they've mapped out a certain route for you. That's cool, but like I'm not driving somewhere to get out of my car to then run. That's awesome. I just I don't want to spend any extra minutes doing that. So I just leave my house and hit start and I start running. So I'm limited with my routes. I'm either going left or right out of my house, and kind of is what it is. Next question. I'm in your group. I love it. Thank you. I rearrange 4 days into 3 slightly longer full body days and cut down some movements to 2 sets with forced progression or myo rep match. Overall, am I okay with this strategy, doing it to save time mostly? So until you said the forced progression or myo rep match, I absolutely love this. So if you took my 4-day program and you modified it into 3 slightly longer full body days, and when you say longer, you just mean more exercises because you're dropping it down to 2 sets. So it's probably a little longer, but maybe not that much longer. So 3 full body days, 2 sets per exercise, a couple more exercises per day, of course, because you're squeezing 4 into 3. If you stopped there, I would say I absolutely love I absolutely love that. I don't think you should be doing forced progression or myo rep match on everything. I would not do that. Do I think you'll survive? Like you said, you're like, I'm doing okay. If you told me, hey, Jordan, I'm progressing. I'm every cycle I'm a little stronger, a little bit. Not every week everything goes up. Every cycle you are a little bit stronger. Then I'm very happy, and you could go off and do this, no big deal. I just don't think it's necessary, and you're probably incurring a bit more fatigue than you need to. I love forced progression, and I love myo rep match, by the way, but not on everything. I wouldn't use these on most exercises, frankly. Some, more isolation work, machine work, I think it's okay to do that. My final answer is that I think you'll survive this, but I would use forced progression and myo rep match sparingly or more sparingly, and I would not just sparingly in terms of less frequently, but I would use it. I'd have a higher threshold of the stuff that I would use it on. Like if you're myo rep matching or forced progressing, like leg presses or something, or like lunges or split squats, like get the fuck out of here. Like you're going to die. But if you're doing that with like, hey, no, what I meant is I do that on like bicep curls and tricep extension and lateral raises and maybe even lat pull down or chest supported row or something, like I think you'll survive. I really do. I think you will survive. So this is great. I mean, this is a great way to set this up, and you have my blessing. All right, let's do a couple more. I read that working within 65 to 85% of 1RM is good as long as you are close to failure. Do you agree? I guess I'd like reassurance that the 65% end is okay. For example, I hate doing RDL super heavy. So I think it's way wider than this, actually. I think you could probably train with less than 65% of 1RM. I think we have studies of like down to 30% 1RM. So regardless of the exact percentage, I think the percentage is really wide. So if you're even working in like the 5 to 25 rep range, or even 3 or 4 to 25, let's say, and you're going appropriate close to failure, you're good. Like you will get jacked. I'd be remiss, and this will be the last question for today, but I'd be remiss if I did not mention that again, by the way, let me see. By the way, it's so funny. I've never been a power lifter, so communicating percentages of 1RMs and then trying to equate how many reps you can do. I'm not like, if you ask a power lifter, hey, how many reps of 65% of your 1RM can you do? They will know the answer to that. I've never been a power lifter. I don't know what 65% works out to in terms of reps. So I'm going to just Google that real quick. So how many reps can I do with 65% of my 1RM? It's about 10 to 12 reps for most people. So 10 to 12 reps, dude. Are you insinuating that you can't grow muscle on 10 to 12 reps? You sure as shit can grow muscle on 10 to 12 reps. 10 to 12 reps is great. What I would say, if you were to tell me, there are going to be people who still say that, hey, from 5 to 30 reps, you can grow muscle equally. And that's like, I don't know if that's specifically true, but it highlights an important point that going close to failure is what matters. When you push a muscle close to failure, what you are doing is recruiting your high threshold motor units, the big, powerful motor units, the ones that have the biggest growth potential. That's what you want to do. And so getting close to failure is what matters, not necessarily how many reps you're doing, and again, consequently, how much weight you're using. Within reason, right? Sets of like 70 to 100 are in all likelihood less hypertrophic. And beyond that, by the way, when we're talking about like notably higher reps, right? 15 to 30, I will say, I'm not worried about the fatigue monster. They're going to be all these TikTok kids right now are like, oh, you got to do sets of 5 to 7 because, more reps causes more fatigue. And they're not technically wrong in most cases where doing sets of really high reps on average are more fatiguing. I just don't think it's going to matter in your training. I don't think doing a couple higher rep sets is all of a sudden going to take you from recovering optimally to shitting the bed, waking up, unrecovered every day. But I think on average, with lower reps, you are going to be more accurate with your RIR prescription. So if I ask you to go to 1 RIR, you're going to be way better at that with a set of 6 to 8 than you are going to be with a set of 16 to 18. The higher rep sets tend to involve more metabolite buildup and more of that burning sensation. And that burning sensation can actually cause the, let's call it the early cessation of a set, meaning you quitting early. before you actually got close to failure, because that sort of pain sensation, communicated to your brain that this hurts and I want to be done with it. But when you do a set of 5, 6, 7, 8, you tend to not get that burning sensation. And so you are going to be better at training closer to failure on average with lower reps than higher reps, consequently more weight than less weight. But again, on average, a set of 12, I don't think gets to a point where you're like, oh my God, there's so much metabolite buildup that I have no idea where I am close to failure and I'm just feeling the burn. It's like, no, I doubt that. I doubt that. But I have found this on sets of 15 or more where I get a little bored, things start to hurt, but then I'll watch my set back later and my reps never slowed down. Like I'll just do the last rep at the cruising through that last rep, and then I'm like, it burns, and then I stop. Whereas if you do a set of, I've been doing like sets of 4 to 6 on a lot of things, like there's no doubt in my mind I can't do another rep, there's more nuances to this, by the way. There's more like technically going to failure with lighter reps is closer to failure than not being able to do a rep with a set of 6, right? Because you're going down to a point where you are unable to produce even less force when you're using lighter weights. So technically you are closer to, muscular failure, but I don't think any of that really matters. If you're training heavy, most of your sets are between, let's say 5 and 15. I don't think it's going to make a big deal. Do I think doing sets of 2 and 3 and sets of 20 and 30 probably have a downside? They do. Does that mean you can't ever do them? No. Does that mean if you do them sometimes, you're going to be fine? Yes. Does that mean if you're doing that, especially the higher rep stuff, that you should make darn sure you're close to failure and tell yourself not to quit when it burns? Yes. So I'll get off this. There's so much to talk about in terms of reps, even though you can summarize what to do in a single sentence, right? And there's so much nuance here. But if you train hard, close to failure, between 5 and 15 reps, and you pick a rep range that feels good and intuitive for you, like you said, I don't love doing RDL super heavy. There's also some research where going heavy, it seems that you don't actually have to even go as close to failure. So not only are you better at getting close to failure, but you also don't actually have to get as close to failure because those high threshold motor units are recruited, much sooner with heavier loads. I think they're confounding some things in these papers where, like I said, I think they're confounding those two things where you don't have to get as close to failure, but what's actually happening is people are just better at getting close to failure. But again, conversation for another time. Get close to failure. 65% is totally fine. The higher rep sets. I have people in the group all the time that are like, oh, I'm feeling so much burn on this. I'm like, hey, try a little bit lower reps. See if you're able to get close to failure without that burning sensation. So, and again, that burning sensation is not bad insofar as it's not causing you to end the set early, which, it might do on average more of the time. Okay, wow. Quite the word vomit at the end there. Thank you guys for sticking around. Appreciate all the questions. See you next week. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Where Optimal Meets Practical. If you liked the episode, it would mean the world to me if you posted a screenshot to your social media or left a 5-star review on iTunes. That stuff really helps. If you ever want to get in touch with me, just shoot me a DM on Instagram @JordanLipsFitness. I'm always around to chat. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.